Some stories begin with a headline. This one begins with a promise and the quiet ways promises can bend. Tonight isn't about staring into darkness. It's about how generosity, boundaries, and small decisions can protect the people we love. We'll keep this human and respectful, no graphic detail, names before numbers. You'll meet two lives moving in opposite directions, a doctor who spent decades helping children find steady ground, and a young woman building an online persona that kept asking for more. Between California and a rental house in Las Vegas, attention became currency, kindness became leverage, and a weekend became 48 hours that changed everything. We'll slow that timeline down, step by careful step, and ask the only question that matters for the rest of us: how do you help without losing yourself? Picture a Friday in early March, an airport pickup planned for Monday, a partner who trusts the routine, a house that looks ordinary from the street but is louder than it seems, a roommate torn between fear and doing the right thing, a phone that should have stayed on the charger, a message that should have stayed unread, and a line that, once crossed, can't be uncrossed. As we move through this story, we'll listen to what people said when the room got quiet, track the choices that nudged good intentions off course, and learn what the law expects when money, power, and control collide. By the end, you'll not only understand what happened, you'll leave with practical ways to spot pressure early, set safe limits, and honor the person whose life mattered most. If you've ever lifted someone up and wondered how to keep your own feet planted, this hour is for you. 1. What this case is really about: money, power, and control. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. The pattern begins years before the weekend that matters. In 2016, a recent graduate leaves Jonesboro, Arkansas, for California and builds an online persona that needs constant fuel. In 2017, in the same state, a 70-year-old child psychiatrist known for quiet generosity widens his private habit of helping younger women in financial trouble. He has a partner at home, Judy, and a public life built on service. He also keeps a separate channel of giving that depends on secrecy. Those two lines cross, and the meter starts running. What follows is a ledger, not of numbers, but of leverage. The psychiatrist pays a lease so a young mother and her child can live in a Los Angeles area home. He co-signs a car. He covers groceries, clothes, incidentals, flights. The young mother learns how a request becomes a pattern and how a pattern becomes expectation. The amount is not trivial. Over months, withdrawals accumulate into 6 figures. Each transfer buys comfort, then access, then a tone in messages that reads less like gratitude and more like direction. Investigators later review files the person claims are evidence not shown here, including bank activity, lease paperwork, and digital conversations that map the slope from assistance to control. By late 2017, the language around identity and status hardens. Titles from glossy brands appear in posts and conversations, some accurate in the narrow sense, many exaggerated in the way social media encourages. The persona grows, the income wobbles, the expenses do not. When work slows, the gap is filled with someone else's retirement savings. The giver calls it charity. The receiver calls it need. The relationship is never described in clear terms, which is its own form of power. The lack of definition means the boundaries move to wherever the last message leaves them. At home, the partner notices. Judy sees transfers and asks for an explanation. She hears that a vulnerable single mother needs a bridge. It fits the man she knows, and for a time she accepts it. Then requests become routine, and routine becomes entitlement. A message surfaces in which the young mother disparages Judy and threatens harm if support ends. It is a hard turn. With counsel from Judy, the psychiatrist tries to disengage, The plan is clumsy, but legal close the lease at the end of its term, cease support, pay a finite settlement to relocate out of California. In 2018, the recipient takes the settlement and moves to Las Vegas. The giver hopes the line is cut. The line is not cut. In Las Vegas, a 4-bedroom rental becomes a revolving door. A roommate watches a child. Another guest stays over. A new boyfriend appears. Arguments flare. Police visit the address on disturbances more than once. The persona still requires maintenance. The checks are gone. The dynamic shifts from solicitation to pressure. Allegations are floated about the psychiatrist's private life, framed to inflict reputational damage. The tactic lands because his life's work centers on children and trust. He pays again, now under a different kind of force. The power triangle is clear. Money buys dependency. Dependency buys access. Access buys the illusion that consequences can be delayed indefinitely. The betrayer thrives in that triangle. The psychiatrist delays a firm exit to avoid conflict. The partner watches a boundary erode after she asked for a boundary. The young mother uses the child as context for urgency. No one names the dynamic in plain terms, while it can still be managed with distance and paperwork. Procedure explains how the triangle finally fails. The psychiatrist begins to set firmer conditions. He plans unannounced visits to verify who is living in the property he funds. He signals that support will end if misrepresentations continue. This is the move that matters. When gatekeeping information is the weapon, surprise is a direct challenge, and challenges escalate dependent relationships fast. On Friday, March 1, 2019, he arrives in Las Vegas earlier than expected. Inside the house, he finds roommates he was told did not exist. He calls Judy and describes the situation as lies that have to end. The partner confirms the plan. This is the point where help stops and accountability begins. Real-life examples show how this plays out beyond one address. A parent covers a grown child's rent without a written agreement and discovers 3 other adults living there. A business owner advances payroll indefinitely to a friend and learns the friend is reselling equipment. In both cases, the exit is hardest after the pattern is established. If you have ever bridged a bill for someone, you know that generosity buys gratitude only the first time. After that, it buys terms unless both sides define the stop. The lesson is simple and uncomfortable. Help with limits preserves dignity on both sides. Help without limits becomes a stage for the betrayer. Consequences are not just sentences at the end of a case. They begin the moment a boundary is enforced. After the March 1 call, the Las Vegas household enters a 24-hour spiral. A roommate brings home a drunk guest. Tempers flare. The young mother reads messages between the psychiatrist and her own mother about child safety and drug use concerns, and fury replaces persuasion. A first assault occurs with a blunt object inside a bedroom. A second follows in the garage. The child is removed from the scene by the roommate, a choice that places a single life above the noise of the house. By the following week, on March 7th, a car is found abandoned with a broken window on the outskirts of Las Vegas, and Judy's missing person report becomes a homicide investigation. This section is not meant to sensationalize a weekend. It sets the rule the rest of the film follows. Power without clarity invites betrayal. Money without limits invites escalation. Control without accountability invites harm. The story advances now to the 48 hours that begin when a generous man opens the garage door of a house he paid for and finds out who has been living there. What happens when the betrayer realizes the money is actually going to stop? 2. The making of Bad Barbie, the inflated image and its consequences. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. The image that invites attention becomes the lever that moves money, boundaries, and finally consequences. The pattern begins online before it lands in a house in Las Vegas. In 2016, a young woman leaves Jonesboro, Arkansas, for California and builds a public persona, piece by piece. Early posts present a country aesthetic under the handle. Arkanay sassy 1993 sundresses and guitars, and plaid against bright daylight. The feed learns quickly. Photos that reveal more skin draw more engagement. Captions steer toward confidence and pressure in equal measure. The handle changes to Bad Barbie. The hair goes platinum. The body becomes a project with procedures mentioned in passing, and the label fitness model appears even when the portfolio reads more like pinup than sport. The tone is not unusual for the platform. It is the calibration of appetite and audience that matters. Each small uptick in likes reinforces the next escalation. By 2017, modest visibility slides into the velvet rope economy. Public posts show red carpets and events like Babes in Toyland in Los Angeles. Magazine names are cited. Some are niche glamour titles that rely on freelance shoots and cover trades. A feature lands on Playboy Italia's website, not the American print magazine. An online voting page appears for a Maxim competition with thousands of entrants, where the placement is far from a final. The way those moments are summarized in later captions feels larger than the underlying facts. That is the internet's oldest trick. Titles float free of context, and the audience fills in the rest. Investigators later check the paper trail in files the person claims are evidence not shown here: event rosters, web archives, contest brackets, invoices for shoots, each document stripping the gloss back to timeline and scale. The economics underneath are stable for a season and then uneven. Sponsorship posts pay a fee. A nightclub promotion covers an outfit. A small brand sends product in exchange for mention. Rent in Los Angeles does not flex. A leased car, whether co-signed or rented only for photos, carries costs that keep coming. The public face remains glamorous, even when the math no longer works. The pressure to display pushes spending up and honesty down. The algorithm rewards novelty, not budgeting. Followers cross 100,000 and act as proof of concept even as the inbox shifts from brands to admirers. A child lives in the background of this story. Another child is not in full custody. Maternal responsibilities and an image that must be fed collide, and the gap between income and performance is bridged with someone else's money. Real-life examples make this dynamic legible. A creator adds Forbes featured to a bio after a user-submitted list appears on a contributor blog that is not the magazine's editorial masthead. A self-published ebook wears bestseller after topping a narrow subcategory for a few hours. A luxury car in a photo is borrowed for an hour at a peer-to-peer rental lot, while the caption suggests ownership. None of these are crimes on their own. They are signals in a market where perception steers opportunity, and where opportunity can be monetized directly through the audience or indirectly through private patrons. The risk is not that image building exists. The risk is when the image becomes a promise that cannot be kept without access to someone else's accounts. Procedure matters because it explains how an inflated story turns into leverage. Screenshots show claims that blur web-only features into magazine covers. Captions pair brand names with phrasing that suggests employment rather than one-off attendance. Messages in the same period request help with bills, flights, or medical costs with urgency framed around a child's needs. Each request stands alone until the ledger is viewed over months. Then the arc appears. Assistance becomes expectation. Expectation becomes pressure, and pressure becomes a tool. In that framing, the persona is not simply a costume. It is the plausibility structure that makes the next ask land without friction. The short lesson is plain. Media literacy protects wallet and dignity. Titles should match mastheads. Features should match issue numbers. If a claim is real, it can be verified by a primary source without guesswork. On the personal side, help should travel through clear terms. A written agreement that defines duration and scope preserves both parties. Without it, Friendship language becomes a moving contract. The camera never shows that part. The aftermath always does. The stakes escalate once private money fills the space where brand money used to be. Direct messages replace managers. A benefactor appears who can pay a lease in California, sign a car note, cover groceries and school supplies, and make emergencies stop feeling like emergencies. Gratitude shows up in early messages. Over time, the tone tightens. The persona that drew attention now anchors a pipeline of support. When the flow slows, the same persona can produce reputational threats calibrated to the giver's weak points. A child psychiatrist with a reputation for serving families is vulnerable to online accusations, even baseless ones. And that vulnerability is easier to press in a culture that moves faster than verification. The betrayer thrives where public image and private dependence meet. This section is not an indictment of influencers or those who help. It is the context that makes later decisions make sense. A young mother in Over Her Head builds an audience and then a scaffolding of claims around that audience. A generous man who has spent a career helping finds himself funding a lifestyle he does not fully see. A partner at home watches transfers turn into tension. The path from caption to consequence is shorter than it looks because every step is incremental until the day a boundary is enforced. The story now moves from image to money, from likes to leases, and from public applause to private terms that will not hold without inspection. When a private benefactor finally steps forward and tries to set conditions, who controls the terms? 3. Portrait of a benefactor: generosity, secrecy, and risk. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. Before the California ledger grows, the story needs a clear portrait of the man who funds it, a physician whose public life runs on service and whose private giving creates quiet risk. Thomas is born in 1948, trains as a child psychiatrist, and builds a reputation over decades for steady care. By 2002, he is in California with his partner Judy. Colleagues know the professional who stays late, writes notes parents can understand, and bridges small costs when a family falls short. Former patients remember a patient adult who makes hard weeks manageable. This generosity is not performative, it is habit. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here. Later, capture the ordinary parts of that habit: purchases of textbooks for teens, help with medicines, and a handful of rent transfers to keep a roof over a head. The practice is simple when someone cannot pay for what keeps them stable. He tries to close the gap. A second channel of giving operates in private. Over years, Thomas contacts younger women online who present as struggling, unstable housing, bills due, rehab costs, clean starts that require cash. Conversations turn into transfers. The extent and nature of intimacy remain contested, and the record does not need speculation to explain risk. Investigators later document digital behavior consistent with adult content consumption and money sent after chats that frame help as urgent. This pattern, kept from Judy, has already damaged one marriage. Secrecy is not a footnote. It is the mechanism that lets the pattern repeat. Secrecy keeps public dignity intact while private choices drift. In 2017, the online habit intersects with a rising persona in Los Angeles. A young mother building an audience under a new image receives messages, and soon, money. Initial help looks small meals, rides, short-term cash to cover a bill. The amounts increase as access increases. Dinners out become regular, errands turn into shopping, a lease is discussed and then signed for a home the young mother and her child will use. A car note is co-signed, insurance and maintenance follow. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here later show these transfers building into 6 figures over months, with early withdrawals from a retirement account to fund the pace. The relationship's terms are never formalized. That absence is not benign. When a channel stays undefined, each message becomes a new rule. Judy becomes aware when bank activity does not match the household's rhythm. She asks questions and receives an answer that fits a long pattern of generosity, a single mother, a bridge, a short runway to stability, out of trust, and perhaps out of respect for a lifetime of helping. She tolerates limited support. The tolerance is not consent to an open account. The difference matters. When private aid grows in size and scope without partner visibility, a household takes on risks it did not choose: financial exposure, reputational leverage, and the emotional load of realizing good intentions can be used against the giver. A message arrives that disparages Judy and includes a threat tied to housing. It is a line that converts benevolence into coercion. The couple begins to plan an exit because the pattern is now undeniable. The psychology underneath is ordinary. A helper's identity can become entangled with outcomes, especially when the helper works with families and children for a living. When a transfer resolves a crisis, the brain records relief. Relief feels like purpose. The next request arrives framed as another chance to relieve pain, now for a woman and her children instead of a patient and their family. Saying no then feels like refusing care. Add sunk cost fallacy money already given becomes the reason to give more, so prior gifts make sense, and a smart, disciplined professional can end up in a private economy that runs on urgency and exception. None of this reduces personal responsibility. It explains why a boundary, once delayed, becomes frightening to enforce. Real-life examples make the risks clear. A mentor pays a former student's rent for 2 months after a job loss. The support extends to a year because the student frames each month as the decisive one. A church acquaintance asks for gas money that, over time, becomes car payments and then insurance, while the helper conceals the giving from a spouse to avoid conflict. A small business owner advances payroll to a former employee during a medical crisis, months later. The former employee threatens reputational harm online unless the advance is treated as a gift. In each case, secrecy isolates the giver from accountability and from the partner who might help design a safer plan. The short lesson is procedural and humane. Generosity needs daylight to stay generous. If assistance is private, disclose it to the person who shares your household. If the help is more than once, write it down: amount, purpose, start, stop, and what ends the arrangement. Pay third parties directly when possible. Require verification without apology. A partner who knows where the money goes can help enforce the terms when the helper struggles to do it alone. These steps protect the recipient as well. Clear structure avoids the humiliation of abrupt cutoff and reduces the temptation to escalate when a giver finally says no. If you have ever helped someone in crisis, you know how fast exceptions multiply. A written plan stops multiplication from becoming policy. By late 2018, Thomas and Judy move toward a boundary. They decide to end the lease at term, reclaim the car obligation, and offer a one-time relocation payment contingent on a move out of California. It is an attempt to translate years of informal giving into a finite exit that preserves safety for everyone involved. The young mother accepts the money and relocates to Las Vegas. On paper, the channel closes. Off paper, dependency does not vanish. It seeks new footholds. The persona still requires resources. The house in Nevada adds roommates and a boyfriend. The secrecy that protected the channel now protects a curated story meant to keep it open. This portrait is not an indictment of giving. It is a map of where giving, kept in the dark and scaled beyond its intent, can lead. Thomas's life remains defined by the children and families he served, not by the private habit that exposed him to leverage. The next section follows the money as it leaves California and learns the limits of a plan built on hope rather than verification. When the relocation payment clears and the house in Las Vegas fills, What happens when the benefactor insists on seeing the facts instead of the story? 4. California phase. When charity becomes a contract, you can't exit. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. California. 2017-2018. This is where charity turns into an obligation no one can easily end, and where good intentions become the leverage for loss. The young mother arrives in Los Angeles seeking fame, resources, and stability for her child. Online. Her image is that of transformation, a former country girl turned glamour model, eager to be noticed and adored. Offline. Her needs are immediate and concrete: rent, childcare, transportation, and the small emergencies that add up in a city that does not forgive the unprepared. Thomas, the benefactor, sees the gap and moves to fill it. Their arrangement begins as help for a single mother, a lease signed, bills paid, and groceries provided without public fuss. The absence of a contract, written or spoken, gives the illusion of freedom but seeds a dynamic where expectation replaces gratitude. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here later show transfers in the tens of thousands, cash that comes with the implied promise of continued rescue. In this house, dependency is built brick by brick. The young mother learns that requests met with urgency are likely to succeed again. Thomas learns that rescue, once habitual, becomes less a choice and more an expectation. He tells himself that each new expense, a car, insurance, clothing for the child, is a bridge to independence. But the bridge grows longer and the destination shifts. Judy, at home, tracks the outflows and asks for boundaries. She tolerates the first wave of giving out of trust, but when months become a year, the trust turns to concern. In messages and bank records, the balance between support and risk tips toward the latter. The arrangement grows in complexity as Thomas's help expands to the young mother's own mother, who moves in and begins to benefit from the same stream of resources. Now the lease covers more people, and groceries stretch further. The feeling in the house changes. Instead of a grateful recipient, Thomas encounters demands. Lists are delivered. I need this, I need that, and refusal leads to anger rather than acceptance. The lines between benevolence and obligation blur. Thomas tries to set boundaries but finds resistance threats, complaints, and in one message, a warning that eviction would be met with violence. Charity without structure can morph into a contract the giver never meant to sign. In real life, helpers become on call for relatives, former partners, or clients when their assistance lacks written limits. The just this once phone call after midnight turns into monthly rent, car payments, or medical bills. A lesson emerges when help becomes expected. The person offering it must choose between endless obligation and the risk of escalation. By fall 2018, Thomas and Judy try to reclaim the narrative. They decide to end the lease and propose a one-time payment, $300,000, to help the young mother relocate out of California. The offer is intended as closure, a clear stop, but the absence of legal documentation, no contract, no enforceable terms means that the payment is not a guarantee of peace, only a new round of negotiation. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here later document the transfer, the move, and the emotional aftermath at home. Even with the payment, dependency does not dissolve, it migrates. The young mother relocates to Las Vegas, but the playbook remains requests, persuasion, then threats. The bridge Thomas tried to close in California becomes the road by which leverage crosses state lines. In this, the case is not unique. Helpers everywhere discover that a one-time payout, if not paired with structure, can be treated as a sign of ongoing obligation. A relative gets a farewell gift and returns a month later for more. A tenant offered a moving allowance treats it as the new baseline for help. An ex-partner threatens exposure if payments stop. Each cycle drains resources and increases risk for everyone involved. The short lesson is direct. Help must have an off-ramp, written terms, witness to agreements, third-party transfers, and a clear date when support stops. These are not acts of distrust, but of care for both sides. When an arrangement grows, so do the stakes. Protecting your boundaries early prevents escalation later. If you must end a dependency, do it in writing, with receipts, and when possible, with legal advice. If threats appear, do not negotiate, report, and document. California is where the contract, unspoken but binding, outlives the intent of either side. When the last check clears and the lease closes, both families hope for peace. But the next phase proves that dependency, if left unchecked, survives the move and finds new terms. What will happen when the benefactor, armed now with caution and suspicion, demands to see for himself what his help has built in Nevada? 5. Las Vegas House of Cards roommates, a secret boyfriend, and chaos. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. Las Vegas. Early 2019, the payment that was meant to end the dependency becomes the seed for a new stage, a 4-bedroom rental paid for by a benefactor, but quickly overrun by secrets, manipulation, and risk. Inside this Las Vegas house, the arrangement slides from rescue to chaos. The young mother, still portraying herself to her benefactor as a vulnerable single parent, invites in a stream of new residents. Diana, a bartender and sometime babysitter, moves in and begins caring for the child. Another roommate, Jeremy, appears. And soon a new boyfriend enters Logan, a 27-year-old known for volatility. The benefactor, Thomas, remains in California, unaware that his support now extends to strangers. The house becomes less a home for stability and more a revolving door for parties, arguments, and unspoken agendas. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here, later record police calls to the address, neighbors' reports of noise and fighting, and evidence of multiple occupants in a rental meant for one. Dependency, once masked by gratitude, now mutates into deceit. Thomas is still paying the rent, utilities, and many expenses. Each month, new requests arrive: groceries, repairs, bills suddenly overdue. On paper, the support is for a struggling mother and child. In practice, it funds a party house where boundaries are fluid and accountability is absent. Diana shoulders the burden of care for the child as the mother's attention turns to socializing and controlling the flow of resources. Logan's presence is kept secret from Thomas, whose continued support depends on believing the fiction of a lonely single parent. The real household is hidden whenever Thomas visits rooms cleaned, guests sent away, stories rehearsed. The risk escalates with every lie. Fights spill outside, drawing police and attention. Diana worries about the child's safety, so do neighbors. Thomas's unannounced visit in March 2019 reveals the truth. He finds not only the mother and her child, but roommates and a boyfriend, all living off his money. The confrontation is immediate and explosive. Accusations of betrayal meet defenses rooted in entitlement. In this house, everyone has a motive to stay, to avoid eviction, to keep the money coming. No one wants to lose what has become the foundation of their routine. The house is now a house of cards. Any revelation threatens collapse. Real-life examples echo this setup. Relatives co-sign a lease for a family member, only to find strangers living there. A parent funds a bridge for a child who promises to focus on work or school, but the apartment fills with friends, parties, and risks. In each case, the absence of clear terms and direct oversight allows stories to multiply and risk to escalate. When help is filtered through layers of secrecy, it creates incentives for everyone to maintain the lie until the last possible moment. The lesson is stark dependency that goes unchecked becomes a system of lies, not just a single deception. Those offering help must build in mechanisms for verification, scheduled visits, clear occupancy limits, and third-party check-ins. When beneficiaries resist oversight, it is a signal that something needs to be seen. Protecting a child means prioritizing their stability and safety over the comfort of the adults around them. When chaos becomes routine, a single crisis is only a matter of time. By March 2019, the house is a powder keg. Thomas's visit removes the mask, exposing every secret and threat that has accumulated since the move from California. Entitlement turns to anger, gratitude evaporates, and new lines are drawn in real time. The next 48 hours will decide who controls the story, who pays the price, and whether anyone can walk away safely from the arrangement that began as charity and ended as coercion. What happens when a benefactor demands truth and the house built on fiction is forced to answer, not with words, but with actions? 6. The 48 Hours March 1-2, 2019, a timeline that decides everything. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. In Las Vegas. March 1-2, 2019, every boundary and motive collides inside a house built on secrets and entitlement, producing a timeline that sets consequence into motion and leaves no relationship unchanged. Friday. March 1st, 2019 begins with Thomas arriving unannounced at the Las Vegas rental he's been funding. His intent verify what his support has truly built. Instead of finding a quiet home for a mother and her child, he discovers a party house, multiple adult occupants, and a boyfriend kept hidden from him. The confrontation is immediate. Thomas calls Judy in California and describes the scene, strangers, disorder, and his sense of betrayal. For the next 24 hours, tension builds as Thomas confronts the young mother about the deception and misuse of funds. Arguments cycle between threats and pleading, and roommates try to maintain their access to the house. Every adult feels the stakes. The house is not just at risk of being lost, their entire arrangement built on secrecy, financed by Thomas, is unraveling in real time. By evening, the pressure erupts. Jeremy, a roommate, brings his intoxicated girlfriend over, sparking a jealous and possessive reaction from the young mother. Thomas, seeking order, tries to leave with the girlfriend, triggering new accusations and amplifying the chaos. That night, the only priority that surfaces is self-preservation. Diana, aware of rising danger, removes the young child and brings him to a safe location. This act, small but crucial, keeps a vulnerable witness away from the worst escalation. The early hours of March 2nd, 2019, see a final confrontation spiral out of control. The young mother, furious about Thomas's contact with her own mother and convinced that her access to resources is ending, encourages her boyfriend to intervene. The boyfriend, Logan, complies first with threats, then with violence. Thomas retreats upstairs to avoid further conflict, but the others follow. Diana tends to Thomas's wounds, trying to push for a hospital visit, but is drawn away by demands to clean up the mess. In her absence, violence escalates. Thomas is assaulted again, this time in the garage, while the young mother shouts encouragement. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here later include blood traces, digital messages time-stamped during the crisis, and records of frantic calls. The next choices determine the fallout. Instead of seeking help, the household pivots to concealment. The boyfriend cleans up. The young mother orders a cover-up, and Thomas's body is moved to a car that Thomas himself paid for. They abandon the car and the body far from the house, believing that distance will buy time. The rest of the group packs and flees, the child in tow, moteling their way across Nevada and California, each hour increasing the risk for everyone. Diana, fearing for her safety and racked with guilt, looks for a way out, waiting for the first safe moment to break from the group. Real-life parallels are everywhere. Domestic confrontations where dependency, secrecy, and pride collide can escalate fast. When support is threatened or oversight arrives, people who have learned to rely on leverage may lash out, converting emotional manipulation into force. Victims, often children, elders, or dependents, are safest when a neutral party intervenes early. In cases where violence or fatality results, records show that financial dependency and secrecy are frequent preconditions, not exceptions. The lesson is practical the longer a system of secrets and dependency runs, the more volatile its ending. Unannounced visits, while uncomfortable, are sometimes the only way to see past rehearsed stories. Removing vulnerable parties before escalation is always justified. For benefactors, trust, but verify is not suspicion. It is the minimum safeguard when the stakes are high. Documentation matters in real-time calls, messages, and physical evidence all build the record that will matter to law enforcement, courts, and survivors. By the end of March 2nd, the trajectory for everyone in the house is set. The cover-up begins, the body is discovered, and a missing persons case becomes a homicide investigation. Each person faces the consequences of actions taken over these 2 days. Yet the story is not just about those hours, it is about every moment, every lie, every unverified claim that built up to a crisis. What patterns can break before the next arrangement turns into an ultimatum, and before help becomes the engine of harm? 7. The investigation. A car, a confession, and the evidence web. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. The investigation that follows replaces rumor with record, moving step by step from absence to accountability. On Monday, March 4th, 2019, Judy waits in California for a routine airport pickup that does not occur. She files a missing person report and tells detectives the last known destination, a 4-bedroom rental in Las Vegas that Thomas has supported. Las Vegas Metro officers conduct a welfare check. The house is dark. Mail collects at the door, and recent activity looks hurried rather than planned. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here later include the CAD entry from that check and notes about the property's condition. On Thursday, March 7, 2019, a caller reports an abandoned Mercedes with a broken window on the outskirts of Las Vegas. Patrol responds, runs the plate, and ties the car to the address connected with Thomas. A warrant is obtained. Forensic techs, photograph, swab, and bag trace without drama or speculation. The trunk is opened, and the discovery inside turns an absence into a homicide case. Notifications are made. Judy receives the news that fixes the timeline and raises the stakes. The vehicle becomes the first fixed point of a route map that will soon include phones, cameras, receipts, and witnesses. Detectives start with movement. They obtain historical cell site data for devices linked to Thomas and to the known residents of the rental. License plate readers along corridors between the house and the dump site are queried. A tow record anchors when the Mercedes leaves the lot. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here. Later describe pings that track from the rental to the vehicle location, and then to a cluster of motels used in the days after. The point is not a single ping, but a pattern that can be corroborated. The next layer is people. A neighborhood canvass finds residents who recall loud arguments on the weekend of March 1st to 2 and the presence of a young child in the home. property management confirms that the lease lists only one adult and one child. An earlier police response for disturbance is located, and body-worn camera confirms prior volatility. Surveillance from a nearby store shows familiar faces buying cleaning supplies after midnight on March 2nd. The receipt timestamps line up with the cell map. Each small square of fact touches another until the picture holds. The turning point arrives when Diana walks into a police station and asks to speak to detectives. She's tired, shaken, and not under arrest. She gives a detailed account. Thomas arrives unannounced on March 1st. Arguments about lies and money fill the house. A first assault occurs upstairs. She moves the child to safety. A second assault occurs in the garage. A body is moved to the trunk of a Mercedes. The group flees and moves between motels. Investigators treat her statement as a start, not a finish. They test every claim against independent sources. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here later describe bloodstain patterns in the upstairs room and the garage that align with her narrative, as well as cleaning attempts that fail to erase all trace. Digital forensics adds context without violating dignity. Message logs recovered under warrant show months of financial requests that become directives, and then threats tied to reputation. A taunting note sent to Judy about a new car after a prior vehicle is reclaimed is preserved from a phone backup. Separate messages threaten to defame Thomas if money stops. Investigators do not assign motives. They anchor words to dates and keep them within the chain of custody for court. Money movement tells its own story. After March 2nd, ATM withdrawals and card swipes appear near low-cost motels along highways out of Las Vegas. Security footage shows 2 adults moving bags and a child through side entrances at odd hours. A rideshare account fills in a gap when the Mercedes is out of play. Receipts for snacks and toiletries generate timestamps that bridge otherwise empty minutes. No single record is decisive. Together, they convert a narrative into a chronology. By Thursday, March 25th, 2019, warrants are in hand. Patrol and detectives coordinate to make arrests without incident. The child is separated and placed in safe care. Interviews occur with counsel present. One suspect asserts innocence and blames the other. The other acknowledges acts of violence and frames them as reactions to chaos. Detectives keep to procedure, rights are read. Interviews are recorded. Contradictions are confronted only when records can do the work. Professional tone now serves a practical end later, when prosecutors will rely on clean process as much as on compelling facts. Real-life examples help translate method into meaning. In vehicle dump cases, the car is a portable scene. When secured quickly and processed carefully, it links a private act to a public discovery. In confession-driven cases, a statement is a lead. Corroboration protects truth and due process. In domestic cases with children present, early removal by any adult, as Diana does on March 2nd, is recognized as protective and can affect charging and sentencing decisions. Viewers who find themselves near similar dynamics can take a usable cue, preserve messages, record dates and addresses, and report early with concrete anchors, because specific data shortens searches and strengthens cases. The short lesson is plain. Evidence is patient and cumulative. Phones, cameras, receipts, and witnesses push against secrecy until the record stands on its own. Families can help by saving what seems small in the moment: flight numbers, plate numbers, exact times, and last addresses, because those details become the rails a lawful case runs on. Investigators move from a car to a confession to an evidence web, not to perform for an audience, but to build a file that can survive courtroom scrutiny. With the route mapped, the statements tested, and the physical record stable, the file moves to prosecutors who must translate facts into charges, ranges, and plea options. The next chapter of this story explains how definitions like murder degrees, accessory liability, and an Alford plea turn a weekend's choices into years. So how does a court convert this evidence web into sentences that hold? 8. Courtroom 101 Alford Plea, accessory, and sentencing. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. In court, that pattern is translated into charges, records, and sentences that hold up under review rather than rumor. After arrests on March 21, 2019, the case moves into the Clark County court system in Las Vegas. Arraignments occur first. A prosecutor reads formal counts that separate roles: a principal who carries out fatal violence, a directing participant whose orders and threats amplify harm, and an accessory whose conduct after the fact helps conceal the crime. Bail determinations rest on flight risk, danger to the community, and the weight of evidence. Judges note the interstate movement, the child present during the volatile hours of March 1 to 2, and the quick relocation to motels. The tone remains procedural because every decision must withstand appeal. Discovery follows. The state discloses reports, digital extractions, and forensic submissions. Defense counsel studies how the timeline is proven cell site data that traces devices from the rental house to the vehicle dump site. Receipts for cleaning supplies purchased after midnight on March 2nd. Surveillance showing 2 adults and a child at motel corridors. A welfare check log, and the witness statement from Diana that aligns with physical findings. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here include lease paperwork and car records from California, bank activity that shows early retirement withdrawals, and message logs with threats tied to money and reputation. None of it is theatrical. It is chronology supported by artifacts. Plea discussions begin because trials are risks for all sides. One option on the table is an Alford plea. In an Alford plea, a defendant does not admit the act but acknowledges that the prosecution's evidence would likely persuade a jury beyond a reasonable doubt. Judges accept such pleas only after careful canvass. The defendant understands the rights being waived, is satisfied with counsel, and agrees that a factual basis exists in the record. It is not a loophole. It is a conviction, entered on the strength of the file rather than the defendant's narrative. Across 2020-2022 delays, motions, and pandemic backlogs, slow progress. In 2023, the directing participant, the young mother at the center of the financial and coercive relationship, enters an Alford plea to a homicide charge carrying a range of 10 to 25 years in Nevada. The court reviews the record, orchestrated control over access to the victim, messages that show leverage and threats, direction given during the garage assault, and post-incident commands to conceal. The judge states the statutory range and the reasons the plea is accepted, a robust evidentiary foundation, and the interests of justice in avoiding a re-traumatizing trial. Sentence imposed a term within that 10-25 span, subject to credit and parole review under state law. The principal actor, the boyfriend, pleads guilty. The range is higher, 18 to 45 years. The prosecution argues that direct physical conduct, escalation after an initial assault, and the decision to prevent medical care demand a longer term. The defense offers mitigation youth, claimed confusion, and a chaotic environment. The judge recognizes aggravation and mitigation and imposes a sentence within the higher range, explaining on the record why the statute applies as it does. The signal is clear: the person who chooses violence to secure control bears the heaviest consequence. Diana, the roommate who removes the child, later confesses and cooperates, pleads to being an accessory. She receives 3 years of probation with conditions. The court notes 2 truths at once: she commits crimes by cleaning and leaving with the group. She also reduces harm by extracting a child and later providing a statement that survives corroboration. Cooperation does not erase conduct. It changes how the law responds. Sentencing in Clark County follows a disciplined process. Pre-sentence investigation reports lay out criminal history, community ties, and risk assessments. Counsel argue aggravating and mitigating factors, planning versus panic, threats versus remorse, concealment versus cooperation. Victim impact statements center the person harmed. Judy addresses the court and describes the daily realities of loss appointments on a calendar that will never be kept, a community missing its physician, a home reorganized around absence. Judges often reference these statements to explain proportionality. Sentences are not abstractions. They are the state's measured response to harm documented in a record. Real-life examples help demystify what viewers are seeing. Alford pleas are uncommon but legitimate tools used when defendants refuse to utter an admission. But the evidence is overwhelming. Judges safeguard against empty pleas by insisting on a detailed factual basis. Accessory dispositions often turn on timing and truthfulness. Early cooperation and protective acts can shift a case from prison to supervision with strict conditions. Sentencing ranges track roles. The law cares about who planned, who acted, who prevented or enabled care, and who attempted to erase evidence. Court sentence conduct, not slogans. The short lesson is practical. For families seeking justice, specifics matter more than volume. Save messages with visible timestamps. Keep flight and plate numbers. Write down exact dates and addresses, and report early. For those tempted to view an Alford plea as a way to duck accountability, understand the plain consequence: a conviction is entered, a sentence is served, and parole boards and registries treat it as they would any conviction. For anyone asked to just clean up a scene under pressure, know the legal line: cleaning is not neutral. It is a criminal act that can be charged, and the safer and lawful choice is to leave and call. This courtroom chapter converts a weekend's decisions into years that can be measured and supervised. But paper does not explain why entitlement grows into coercion, or how reputational threats become tools that move money and control. Those answers live in psychology and in the everyday mechanics of dependency that reward secrecy over truth. So what beliefs convince people that leverage can replace accountability? 9. Psychology of entitlement and sextortion. How dependence turns into violence. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. The image that invites attention becomes the lever that moves money, boundaries, and finally, consequences. The pattern begins online before it lands in a house in Las Vegas. In 2016, a young woman leaves Jonesboro, Arkansas, for California and builds a public persona, piece by piece. Early posts present a country aesthetic under the handle, Archon sassy 1993 sundresses and guitars, and plaid against bright daylight. The feed learns quickly. Photos that reveal more skin draw more engagement. Captions steer toward confidence and pressure in equal measure. The handle changes to Bad Barbie. The hair goes platinum. The body becomes a project with procedures mentioned in passing, and the label fitness model appears even when the portfolio reads more like pinup than sport. The tone is not unusual for the platform. It is the calibration of appetite and audience that matters. Each small uptick in likes reinforces the next escalation. By 2017, modest visibility slides into the velvet rope economy. Public posts show red carpets and events like Babes in Toyland in Los Angeles. Magazine names are cited. Some are niche glamour titles that rely on freelance shoots and cover trades. A feature lands on Playboy Italia's website, not the American print magazine. An online voting page appears for a Maxim competition with thousands of entrants, where the placement is far from a final. The way those moments are summarized in later captions feels larger than the underlying facts. That is the internet's oldest trick. Titles float free of context, and the audience fills in the rest. Investigators later checked the paper trail in files the person claims are evidence not shown here: event rosters, web archives, contest brackets, invoices for shoots, each document stripping the gloss back to timeline and scale. The economics underneath are stable for a season and then uneven. Sponsorship posts pay a fee. A nightclub promotion covers an outfit. A small brand sends product in exchange for mention. Rent in Los Angeles does not flex. A leased car, whether co-signed or rented only for photos, carries costs that keep coming. The public face remains glamorous, even when the math no longer works. The pressure to display pushes spending up and honesty down. The algorithm rewards novelty, not budgeting. Followers cross 100,000 and act as proof of concept even as the inbox shifts from brands to admirers. A child lives in the background of this story. Another child is not in full custody. Maternal responsibilities and an image that must be fed collide, and the gap between income and performance is bridged with someone else's money. Real-life examples make this dynamic legible. A creator adds Forbes featured to a bio after a user-submitted list appears on a contributor blog that is not the magazine's editorial masthead. A self-published ebook wears bestseller after topping a narrow subcategory for a few hours. A luxury car in a photo is borrowed for an hour at a peer-to-peer rental lot, while the caption suggests ownership. None of these are crimes on their own. They are signals in a market where perception steers opportunity, and where opportunity can be monetized directly through the audience or indirectly through private patrons. The risk is not that image building exists. The risk is when the image becomes a promise that cannot be kept without access to someone else's accounts. Procedure matters because it explains how an inflated story turns into leverage. Screenshots show claims that blur web-only features into magazine covers. Captions pair brand names with phrasing that suggests employment rather than one-off attendance. Messages in the same period request help with bills, flights, or medical costs with urgency framed around a child's needs. Each request stands alone until the ledger is viewed over months. Then the arc appears. Assistance becomes expectation. Expectation becomes pressure, and pressure becomes a tool. In that framing, the persona is not simply a costume. It is the plausibility structure that makes the next ask land without friction. The short lesson is plain. Media literacy protects wallet and dignity. Titles should match mastheads. Features should match issue numbers. If a claim is real, it can be verified by a primary source without guesswork. On the personal side, help should travel through clear terms. A written agreement that defines duration and scope preserves both parties. Without it, friendship language becomes a moving contract. The camera never shows that part. The aftermath always does. The stakes escalate once private money fills the space where brand money used to be. Direct messages replace managers. A benefactor appears who can pay a lease in California, sign a car note, cover groceries and school supplies, and make emergencies stop feeling like emergencies. Gratitude shows up in early messages. Over time, the tone tightens. The persona that drew attention now anchors a pipeline of support. When the flow slows, the same persona can produce reputational threats calibrated to the giver's weak points. A child psychiatrist with a reputation for serving families is vulnerable to online accusations, even baseless ones. And that vulnerability is easier to press in a culture that moves faster than verification. The betrayer thrives where public image and private dependence meet. This section is not an indictment of influencers or those who help. It is the context that makes later decisions make sense. A young mother in over her head builds an audience, and then a scaffolding of claims around that audience. A generous man who has spent a career helping finds himself funding a lifestyle he does not fully see. A partner at home watches transfers turn into tension. The path from caption to consequence is shorter than it looks because every step is incremental until the day a boundary is enforced. The story now moves from image to money, from likes to leases, and from public applause to private terms that will not hold without inspection. When a private benefactor finally steps forward and tries to set conditions, Who controls the terms? 10. Aftermath and Safety Toolkit, protecting ourselves and honoring the victim. The archetype in this story is the betrayer. Help is offered, then twisted, then weaponized. After arrests on March 20, 2019 and pleas entered by 2023 court orders close a legal chapter, the aftermath remains. Judy lives with a calendar that still suggests airport pickups and anniversaries that will not arrive. Former patients in California speak about a physician who stayed late, who wrote clear notes, who steadied families under strain. This film keeps the victim at the center by treating his life as more than a prologue and his absence as more than a headline. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here preserve the dates, devices, and transactions that made justice possible. The community preserves the meaning. Honoring the victim begins with continuity. Colleagues advocate for mentorship programs that place steady adults in children's lives, the kind of quiet work Thomas modeled. A clinic adds a small fund to cover textbooks or a month of medication when a family cannot bridge it. A scholarship carries his name without spectacle. These acts do not rewrite the past. They reject cynicism. They also tie remembrance to prevention, which is where an everyday safety toolkit belongs. Prevention starts before crisis. Assistance works best when it is explicit amount, purpose, start, stop, and conditions for review. Payment to third parties' landlords, utilities, childcare providers keeps help pointed at needs instead of routines. Occupancy limits belong in writing for any home support. Verification is not cruelty, it is care for both sides. A partner who shares the household should be looped in to avoid secrecy that isolates givers and confuses recipients. Real-life example, a retiree co-signs a car for 6 months, then spends 2 years paying insurance and tickets. A sunset date and title conditions at the outset would have prevented a slow-motion crisis. Documentation is the second pillar. Save messages with visible timestamps. Keep flight numbers, plate numbers, and exact addresses whenever travel or meetings involve tension. Backup threads in more than one place. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here show how ordinary fragments, receipts, phone logs, neighborhood statements became the rails this case ran on. Families who keep small details make investigations faster and court files stronger. Threats to reputation require a firm line. Sextortion demands tied to exposure, real or fabricated feeds on secrecy and panic. The safe response is preservation and reporting, not negotiation. Screenshots with dates, exports of full threads, and a log of contact times deliver structure to counsel and law enforcement. Platform reporting tools and police reports turn private pressure into a documented offense. A small creator who refuses to reimburse a canceled booking as if it happened saves the threats and uses official channels ends a pattern rather than funding it. Exiting a high-risk dependency benefits from planning. A taper schedule reduces shock partial support for a defined period tied to verifiable steps toward independence, then zero. Meetings happen in public spaces. 2 adults attend. Prior threats are disclosed to counsel and, when appropriate, to local officers so welfare checks are informed by context. If a beneficiary resists oversight, delay the meeting rather than concede conditions that erase safety. Children are non-negotiable. Identify a known safe home in advance. Pack a small go bag and remove them at the first sign of volatility. They do not return until a neutral adult confirms stability. Bystanders carry responsibility and protection. If violence erupts, remove vulnerable people, leave, and call. Do not clean at someone else's direction. Cleaning turns witnesses into accessories and erodes truth. In this case, a roommate's choice to move a child out during the evening of March 2nd reduced harm. Later, cooperation helped convert rumor into record. Files the person claims are evidence not shown here link that cooperation to corroboration that held through charging and sentencing. The legal system can recognize fear and still enforce lines. Calling earlier makes both outcomes more likely. Financial and digital hygiene are quiet safeguards. Avoid co-signing debt unless terms and end dates are formalized. If a relationship with financial support ends, revoke shared access, change passwords, and review account recovery settings. Consider freezing credit if identity leverage is a risk. Whenever possible, pay vendors directly and keep receipts with dates and amounts. A simple log who, what, when, where turns memory into evidence if a dispute hardens into danger. The short lesson is narrow and durable. Generosity remains generous when paired with daylight, documentation, and a plan for exit that does not depend on willpower in the moment. People who intend good do not fear verification. People who intend leverage require you to look away. Honoring a victim means refusing the conditions that allowed harm to grow secrecy around help, improvisation under pressure, and tolerance for threats framed as urgency. As this story closes, the camera stays with the people who keep faith with Truth Judy, who speaks with dignity, colleagues who make care practical, viewers who adopt small habits that lower risk long before police lights arrive. The betrayer thrives where boundaries blur. He loses ground wherever a community writes help down, pays it forward cleanly, and protects children first. Which two habits will you adopt now so the help you offer never has to compete with control?